3 weeks ago, I watched my mother sob into her hands in a courtroom hallway. Not because she was sorry for what my brother had done to me. Not because she finally understood the position she put me in. She was crying because a real estate attorney had just asked her one question she couldn't answer, and every person in that room had heard her silence. My brother forged my signature. He transferred a $165,000 property out of my name and into his, collected rent on it for 8 months without telling me. And when I found out, my parents looked me in the eye and said, "She worked so hard her whole life. Don't do this to the family, let it go. I want to tell you everything. But first I need you to understand who I was before any of this happened. Because the person I was before is exactly why my brother thought he could get away with it. My name is Mia. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Charlotte. I know how property law works. I know what a quitclaim deed is. I know what forgery carries as a criminal charge in North Carolina. And somehow, despite all of that, I spent 3 weeks convincing myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to accept about my own family. Let me take you back to the beginning. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, raised me in a way my parents never quite managed to. That sounds harsher than I mean it. My parents were bad people. They were just focused. My brother Derek was 3 years older than me and had been the axis around which our entire household rotated since before I could form a memory. Derek struggled in school. Derek needed tutoring. Derek's baseball team needed new cleats. Derek's baseball team needed new cleats. Derek's car broke down. Derek was going through a rough patch. There was always something with Derek, and our parents always had something to give. I was the easy one. I didn't need much. I figured things out. Mia will be fine, my mother used to say, the way you describe weather, matter of fact, certain, not particularly warm, and I would be fine. I always was. But the word fine and the word loved are not the same thing. And it took me until my mid-20s to understand the difference. Nana Ruth understood the difference. When I visited her in Greensboro every other weekend through high school, she'd sit with me at her kitchen table and actually look at me. Not through me, not past me, to see if Derek needed something. At me. She asked about my friends, my plans, the book I was reading. She told me I was sharp and said it like she was proud of it. She kept a framed photo of just me on her nightstand. One time I asked her why that one, and not a family photo, and she said, "Because you need to know someone's watching out for you." When Nana Ruth passed 2 years ago, she left her house to me. Not to Derek, not to my parents, to me. There was a will. It was notarized and filed. The house on Clover Lane in Greensboro, a 3-bedroom bungalow she'd owned outright for 20 years, went to Mia. My parents accepted it quietly, which surprised me. Derek said congratulations and hugged me at the funeral, and I thought, we're going to be okay. I thought we had moved past the years of imbalance into something more adult, more even. I was living in Charlotte, a 2-hour drive from Greensboro. I'd been renting a 1-bedroom apartment, putting money away, figuring out what to do with the property. My plan was to either sell it or rent it out for a few years and use the income toward a down payment on my own place. I wasn't in a rush. The estate took 6 months to fully settle, and during that time my parents offered to handle things on the Greensboro end, checking on the property, forwarding any mail, coordinating with the estate attorney. I said yes. I trusted them. That was the lock. And I handed them every key without realizing it. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was eating lunch at my desk, half reading a deposition transcript, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. A 336 area code, Greensboro. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. The woman on the line said her name was Patricia. She said she'd been renting the house on Clover Lane for the past 7 months, and she needed to speak with the owner about a plumbing issue in the second bathroom. I put my sandwich down very slowly. I told her there must be a mistake. She said she paid rent of $850 a month, direct deposit, to an account she could give me the last 4 digits of if that helped. I asked her who she communicated with when she signed the lease. She said, "A man named Derek." I kept my voice completely steady. I thanked her, told her I'd look into the plumbing issue, and said I'd be in touch. I hung up the phone and sat completely still for probably 30 seconds. Then I pulled up the county property records for Guilford County, North Carolina. The house on Clover Lane was no longer in my name. A quitclaim deed had been filed 11 months ago, 2 months after the estate settled, transferring ownership from Mia to Derek. The signature on the deed was mine. Or it looked like mine. I had never signed that document. I had never been in a room where that document existed. I had never agreed to give my brother my grandmother's house. My hands were shaking when I called the estate attorney who had handled Nana Ruth's will. She confirmed what I already knew. The property had legally been transferred. The deed was on file. The signature appeared valid. She paused and said, in the careful way attorneys speak when they're trying not to alarm you, "Mia, if you didn't sign this, that's a serious matter." "I know," I said. "I know exactly what it is." I drove to Greensboro that weekend. I knocked on the door of the house on Clover Lane and introduced myself to Patricia, who looked understandably confused and a little alarmed. I asked if I could see the lease she had signed. She showed it to me. My brother's name was listed as landlord, his contact information, his bank account for deposits. He'd been collecting rent for 8 months on a property he'd obtained by signing my name to a legal document. I sat in my car in front of the house my grandmother left me and thought about the photo on her nightstand. Someone's watching out for you. I called my parents that evening. I told them exactly what I'd found. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a case file, the quitclaim deed, the date it was filed, the tenant, the rent that had been collected, the signature that wasn't mine. My mother went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mia, are you absolutely sure you didn't sign something you forgot about?" "I'm a paralegal, Mom. I know what a quitclaim deed is. I would remember signing one." Another pause. Then, "Let me talk to Derek." She called me back 40 minutes later. Her voice had changed. It was the voice she used when she'd already decided something and was just delivering the conclusion. Derek had explained everything, she said. He'd been struggling financially since his divorce. He thought I wouldn't mind if he rented it out for a while since I wasn't using it. He was going to talk to me about it. Mom. He forged my signature on a legal document and transferred property out of my name. He made a mistake, Mia. He panicked. You know how Derek gets. I thought about saying something. I thought about listing every single time in our lives that Derek had gotten, and every single time our parents had absorbed the consequences so that Derek wouldn't have to feel them. I thought about the cleats and the tutoring and the car repairs, and Nana Ruth's framed photo on the nightstand. Instead, I said, I need him to sign the property back over to me. I need it done by the end of the month. Mia, if he does that, I'll consider whether I want to take this further. If he doesn't, I'm going to an attorney. She said she'd talk to him. He did not sign the property back. 2 weeks later, my father texted me, "Family dinner Sunday. Please come. Just come and talk." I want to stop here for a second, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why did she go? And honestly, I think about that too. There was still a part of me, that quiet, persistent, deeply stubborn part, that wanted to believe my parents would look at the facts and choose correctly. That wanted to believe family meant something more than closing ranks around whoever was in trouble. I went. When I walked into my parents' house, Derek was already there. He didn't stand up when I came in. He looked at his phone. My mother brought out food like it with any other Sunday, and for about 15 minutes we all sat there pretending this was a normal dinner. Then my father cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the situation," he said. I waited. Derek spoke first. He said he'd been in a bad place after the divorce. He said the house had just been sitting there. He said he fully intended to transfer it back and pay me what he owed. He said he'd made a judgment call and it was the wrong one. I looked at him. This man I grew up with. This man whose name had taken up so much oxygen in our household for so many years. Sitting across from me with no apology in his eyes. Just the practiced expression of someone who had been forgiven so many times it had stopped meaning anything. Derek, I said, you forged my signature. That's a felony. My mother made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, like I had said something obscene. We are not using that word in this house, she said. That word. Felony. The word that accurately described what her son had done. What word would you prefer? I asked. He made an error in judgment, my father said. He's family, your family. We handle family matters inside the family. I asked them what handling it inside the family looked like. I asked whether inside the family meant Derek would sign the property back over to me, with back rent paid, in writing, by a certain date. My mother said the back rent was a lot to ask. 8 months at $850 a month. $6,800 that had been collected on a property I owned by someone who had stolen it. He needed it, my mother said. And then she said the thing. The thing that I keep coming back to, that I have turned over in my mind probably 200 times since that dinner. She said, "You've always had a good head on your shoulders, Mia. You'll figure this out. You always do. You'll figure this out. You always do." 23 years of being the easy one, compressed into one sentence. The assumption that I would absorb whatever happened to me and rebuild quietly so that Derek wouldn't have to face what he'd done. I put my fork down. I folded my napkin. I said, I have given him 2 weeks and he has not moved. I'm going to consult an attorney about my options. Derek looked up from his phone for the first time. You're serious. Did you think I wasn't? Mia. His voice shifted into something I recognized, the tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable and wronged at the same time. You're really going to blow up this family over a house? You blew up this family when you forged my name on a legal document. I'm just the one dealing with the consequences. I left before dessert. Okay, I want to pause right here, because at that point I had 2 real options, and I'm curious which one you would have chosen. Option A. Let it go. Hire my own attorney. Force a transfer through civil court. Accept the back rent was probably gone. Move on. Keep the peace. Stay in the family. Option B. File a criminal complaint. Forgery, fraud, potentially theft by taking. Let the legal system do what it does. Leave your answer in the comments. A or B. And stay with me, because what happened next is something I absolutely did not see coming. I didn't make my decision that night. I sat in my apartment in Charlotte for 3 days, calling no one, running the facts through my head like a loop. I knew the law. I knew what his exposure was. I also knew what reporting your own brother feels like in your chest, regardless of what he deserved. On the 4th day, I called a criminal defense attorney I knew through work, not to hire her just to understand the landscape. She listened to everything. Then she said, Mia, I want to be straight with you. Quitclaim deed forgery is a Class I felony in North Carolina. If you file, and the signature analysis confirms it's not yours, he's looking at an indictment, probably a plea deal, probation, restitution, community service. But it's a criminal record. It follows him. I asked her what civil only looked like. She said, slower, more expensive on my end, and he walks away without any criminal accountability. She paused. I'll also tell you this. In my experience, people who do this once have done it before, or will do it again. He didn't do this in a panic. He researched how to file a quitclaim deed. He found a tenant, he set up a payment account. This was planned. That was the sentence that changed things. This was planned. I filed a complaint with the Greensboro Police Department on a Friday morning. The detective I spoke with was a woman named Sandra Okafor. Calm, direct, the kind of person who has heard every version of every story, and still pays attention to yours. She took my documentation, the original will, the estate settlement records, the quitclaim deed, the lease agreement Patricia had shown me, the transaction records my brother's rental account had generated. She said, this is well documented. We'll open an investigation. I told my parents that night. My mother did not speak for a long moment. Then she said quietly, you filed a police report against your brother. He committed a crime against me. He is your family? He forged my signature and stole my grandmother's house. Her voice went cold in a way I had never heard from her before. Not angry. Cold. If you do not drop this, Mia, I don't know if we can come back from it. I told her I understood. Then I said, I love you, but I'm not withdrawing the complaint. She hung up. What happened over the next 6 weeks was something I had prepared myself for, intellectually but not emotionally. My parents stopped calling. Derek had his attorney send me a letter suggesting I was confused about the details of the estate settlement, which was so transparently false that my firm's senior partner, who reviewed it as a personal favor, actually laughed. My aunt on my mother's side texted me twice, asking if I'd considered the damage this was doing to the family. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years posted something vague on social media about how some people prioritize being right over being kind. I went to work. I came home. I monitored the case. I waited. Detective Okafor called 6 weeks after I filed. We have enough to move forward. The DA is filing charges, felony forgery and obtaining property by false pretense. I asked about the signature analysis. Forensic document examiner confirmed it. The signature on the deed does not match your known samples. It's consistent with a practiced forgery. Someone who had access to your signature over a period of time and replicated it deliberately. I thought about every card I'd ever signed in our house, every birthday check I'd written, every document left on the kitchen table. There's one more thing, she said. When we pulled his financial records, we found he'd also used his ex-wife's identity to open 2 credit accounts during their marriage, without her knowledge. She's aware now. She's deciding whether to file separately. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Not the first time. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the Guilford County Courthouse. I wore gray slacks and a black blazer. I was a witness, not a party. I didn't have to speak at this stage, just be present. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the 3rd row behind the bar. Derek was already at the defense table. He'd hired a private attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making things quietly disappear. Derek was in a button-down, no tie, trying to look like a reasonable person who had made a clerical error. He didn't look at me when I came in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, a few other people waiting for their own cases. A court reporter in the corner. The bailiff near the door. Then I heard the main doors open. I turned, expecting strangers. My parents walked in. My father in his church blazer. My mother in a dark dress, her hair neat, her expression set. They walked down the center aisle, and for one completely irrational second, I thought they were coming to sit with me. They sat directly behind my brother. My mother reached forward and put her hand on his shoulder. My father nodded to Derek's attorney. Then my mother turned, found my eyes across the room, and held them for a moment without expression. I faced forward. The Honorable Judge Diane Merritt presided. She was in her mid-50s, methodical, with the kind of energy that suggests she has personally seen every version of human foolishness and is not particularly surprised by any of it. The charges were read. Derek entered a not guilty plea in a voice that was almost steady. The prosecutor introduced the document evidence. Then Derek's attorney rose and said that they had character witnesses present. Derek's parents, who wished to make statements on his behalf. The judge looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor said she had no objection for preliminary purposes. My mother took the stand first. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then she looked directly at me and began. She said Derek was a good man who had made a mistake under extreme financial stress. She said his divorce had nearly destroyed him. She said he had always intended to make things right with me. Then she said, Mia has always been resentful of Derek. She's used this situation to punish him for things that go back to childhood. She is not the victim she's presenting herself as. The room was very quiet. My father followed. His statement was shorter. He said I had gone to the police without giving the family a chance to resolve the matter internally. He said I had never given Derek a fair chance. He said I had always kept score. Both of those things were factually incorrect. I had given Derek 2 weeks and a clear condition. I had asked for a meeting. I had offered to resolve it privately. None of that mattered now, because I couldn't speak. Witnesses don't interrupt testimony. I sat in that courtroom and listened to my parents, under oath, reframe 8 months of documented fraud as a family disagreement I had manufactured out of old sibling rivalry. And I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. The particular clarity that comes when you finally see a thing for exactly what it is. Judge Merritt had not reacted during either statement. She had written a few notes, adjusted her glasses once, kept her face neutral. When my father stepped down, she removed her glasses and set them on the bench in front of her. She looked at my parents, who were now seated again behind my brother. Mr. and Mrs., she checked her notes. Mr. and Mrs. Graham, please remain standing. They looked at each other. My father found my mother's hand. The judge's voice was even, not unkind. The way someone speaks when they want the words to land cleanly. I've heard your statements. You believe your son acted out of desperation, not malice. You believe your daughter is motivated by something other than a legitimate grievance. She paused. I have one question for you. The room seemed to get smaller. In the time between when your daughter informed you that this deed had been filed without her consent, and today, did either of you make any effort to ensure she was made whole? Did you offer to cover the back rent? Did you offer to help facilitate the transfer back? Did you contact an attorney on her behalf? Did you at any point make a single concrete gesture toward repairing the harm done to your daughter? The silence lasted long enough to become its own answer. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. My father stared at the floor. 5 seconds, 10, 15. My mother started. Stopped. We told Derek he needed to make it right. I didn't ask what you told Derek, the judge said. I asked what you did for Mia. Nothing. My father's jaw moved. He said very quietly, we didn't have the money to. I didn't ask about money, Mr. Graham. I asked about effort, about intention, about whether, at any point in this process, you treated the daughter who was defrauded with the same degree of urgency and care you are demonstrating today for the son who committed the fraud. My mother began to cry. Not the composed, sympathetic tears she had been managing all morning. Something uglier. The kind of crying that happens when a version of yourself you've believed in for a long time suddenly stops being believable. My father put his arm around her. He did not look up. Judge Merritt turned to the bench. This case is scheduled for trial. The defendant will remain on conditional release, no contact with the victim, surrender of passport, mandatory check-ins. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Mandatory check-ins. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Graham, I strongly recommend you have a detailed conversation with your attorney about the evidence in this file before you decide how you wish to proceed. She called the next case. Derek finally looked at me as the bailiff moved past him. Not with remorse. Not with any recognition of what he had done. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was an inconvenience that had briefly become a crisis and would eventually, like all inconveniences, resolve itself. I understood something in that moment that I hadn't fully understood before. My brother was never going to see me. Not really. I had been invisible to him the same way I had been invisible in our house. Present, functional, available, forgettable. He had forged my name because he had never quite believed I was a person whose name meant something. He found out it did. 6 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Derek accepted a plea agreement. I wasn't present at the sentencing, but my attorney called me with the terms: guilty plea to felony forgery, 18 months of supervised probation, 160 hours of community service, and full restitution, the fair market rent for 8 months plus statutory interest, totaling just over $8,000, paid in monthly installments until cleared. The property was transferred back to my name as a condition of the plea. He also had a felony conviction on his permanent record, my attorney said. This will show up on every background check he ever has for the rest of his life. I thanked her and put the phone down and sat for a while. The thing about getting what you fought for is that it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like the end of something long, and you're exhausted, and the house is quiet, and you realize you've been holding your breath for months. My father called 3 weeks after the sentencing. He said he wanted to meet. Just the two of us. We sat at a diner between Charlotte and Greensboro midway. He looked older than I remembered from the courthouse. He ordered coffee and didn't drink it. He said, "I'm not here to ask you to forgive your brother." I waited. "I'm here because I should have said something at that dinner, when your mother said you'd figure it out." He looked at his coffee cup. I knew what she was doing. I've always known what she does when Derek is in trouble, and I've always let it happen because it was easier than the alternative. I asked him what the alternative was. He said, admitting that we raised one child to believe he could take from the other without consequence. We sat there for a long time. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't perform remorse. He just said true things, which was more than I had expected, and somehow still less than I needed. I set my terms before we left. I told him I was open to a relationship with him. Phone calls, occasional visits, the kind of cautious, rebuilt thing that doesn't pretend the past didn't happen. I told him I would not attend any family gathering where Derek was present. I told him my mother was welcome to reach out when she was ready for a real conversation, not a defense of what had been done to me. He nodded. He said he could work with that. I drove home alone, which is how I've made most of the important drives in my life. The house on Clover Lane is mine now. I've listed it with a property manager. A new tenant moved in last month. A retired teacher named Vivian who keeps a bird feeder on the front porch and texted me a photo of it the first week just to say she loved the light in that backyard. I told her my grandmother would have liked that. My credit is untouched. My record is clean. My name means something. I've been in therapy since the preliminary hearing, weekly, then every 2 weeks, as things got quieter. My therapist asked me once what I thought Nana Ruth would say about all of it. I thought about the photo on the nightstand. I thought about the way she looked at me at that kitchen table. I think she'd say she wasn't surprised. I think she'd say she left me that house because she knew something I was still learning. That I was worth protecting, even when the people who should have protected me wouldn't. If you're watching this and you've ever been told you're overreacting, you're too sensitive, you're punishing someone for a simple mistake. I want you to hear this. There is a difference between a mistake and a decision. A mistake is something that happens. A decision is something someone chose. My brother chose to research how to file a quitclaim deed. He chose to forge my signature. He chose to find a tenant, set up a payment account, and collect rent for 8 months on something that wasn't his. He didn't panic into that. He planned it. He did it because he had spent 34 years learning that when he took something that belonged to someone else, the someone else would figure it out. I figured it out. Just not the way any of them expected. The people who love you don't ask you to disappear, so they can keep the peace. They don't weigh your loss against someone else's comfort and decide your loss is lighter. They don't look you in the eye and say you'll be fine when what they mean is, I need you to be fine so I don't have to deal with this. You are allowed to not be fine. You are allowed to name what was done to you. You are allowed to let the consequences land where they belong. I still drive past Clover Lane sometimes when I'm in Greensboro. The bird feeder is always full. The porch light Nana Ruth installed 20 years ago still works. I sit in my car for a minute, and I think about her. And I think about the woman I am now. Not the easy one. Not the one who figures it out so nobody else has to. Just mine. Finally, entirely mine. Thank you for listening. If any part of this felt familiar to you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I read every comment. Tell me your story. And if you want more, subscribe and check the description for related videos. Take care of yourself. You've earned it. There's something nobody tells you about fighting for yourself. The hardest part isn't the paperwork, or the court dates, or even the silence from people you love. The hardest part is the moment you realize the situation was never really about the house, or the money, or the forged signature. It was about whether you believed your own life was worth defending. For most of mine, I didn't. Not fully. I had been the easy one for so long that easy had become my identity, and identities have a way of becoming cages. I didn't ask for help because I had stopped expecting it. I didn't push back because I had learned, early and repeatedly, that my needs took up space that was already spoken for. That kind of conditioning doesn't announce itself. It just quietly shapes every decision you make. Until one day, someone forges your name on a legal document, and your first instinct, before anger, before grief, is to wonder if there's some explanation that makes it not what it clearly is. What I've come to understand is that actions have weight, not in a mystical sense, but in a plain, practical one. My brother spent years learning that the people around him would absorb the consequences of his choices. My parents spent years teaching him that lesson, one small rescue at a time, without ever meaning to. And I spent years learning the opposite, that my discomfort wasn't worth interrupting anyone over. Those were the conditions that made what happened possible. Not fate. Not randomness. The entirely predictable result of patterns that had been building for decades. When I finally chose differently, when I filed that complaint and held the line, I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest about what reality actually required. Cause meets effect. That's not punishment. That's just how things work when you stop cushioning them. The courage it took wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like strength in the moment. It felt like exhaustion, like grief, like driving home alone after difficult conversations and sitting in a parking lot longer than you should. Courage rarely announces itself. It mostly just looks like continuing to do the hard thing when every part of you wants to make the discomfort stop by giving in. And the intelligence required wasn't anything complicated either. It was just the willingness to look at facts as facts, to call a forged signature what it was, to call a planned fraud what it was, to refuse the narrative that reframing something as a mistake somehow changes its nature. Clarity is a form of intelligence. So is knowing the difference between a relationship worth saving and a dynamic worth ending. Nana Ruth left me that house because she saw something in me that I was still learning to see in myself. She wasn't making a statement, she was making a record. A record that said, this one matters. This one is worth something. Don't let anyone tell her otherwise. I'm telling you now, whoever needed to hear this today, you are allowed to matter. You are allowed to name what was done to you, hold people to account for it, and still be a good person. Those things are not in conflict. The people who benefit from your silence will tell you they are. Don't believe them.